And Coco, where you at, comrade? Alrighty.
I'm right here. Welcome to the breakdown. This program is brought to you by the African National Women's Organization, ANWO. Um, also known as ANWO, I should say, a mass organization under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party. The breakdown is ANWO's monthly news, analysis, and opinion program. It is a platform from lifting up the struggles of colonized women everywhere around the world who are resisting colonialism and organizing our liberation. My name is Coco Lewis. I serve as the AMWO's Information and Education Coordinator. I'll be your MC for today's program. Join, I'm joined today by the leadership of AMWO, President Yejide Ormila, who is also a leading member in the African People's Socialist Party, Jay Amiche, and Miriam Muhammad. Today's episode is Badges, Borders, and Blackness, where we connect the dots between ICE's recent surge in Minneapolis and the ongoing experience of state violence that Black people have faced long before federal agents arrived. These federal immigration operations, known as Operation Metro Surge, have brought thousands of agents into Black and immigrant neighborhoods, especially target the Somali community. Many residents are U.S. citizens, yet are treated as suspects and criminals. For decades, Black communities have lived under heavy policing, surveillance, and criminalization. Now, those same tactics, including raids, stop and frisk, and racial profiling, are being carried out under the banner of immigration enforcement. What is happening in Minneapolis is not new. It's part of the colonial system that has been waging war against African and other colonized communities. This episode looks at the scourge of colonial state violence from stop and frisk to deportation. We will expose how colonial targets African and other colonized communities, regardless of birthplace or immigration status. Before we begin, I want to remind you who we are. AMWA is a anti-imperialist, anti-colonial, revolutionary, internationalist membership organization for African women. We organize around the conditions that create the special oppression of African women in films, and we fight to transform those conditions. Our vision is a world where African women and have agency and are valued and protected and are the makers and shapers of a new society. If you like this program, we encourage you to become a member of ANWO. If you are an African woman, go to anwouhuru.org or financially support ANWO. Our goal for today's broadcast is to raise $100 to support Project St. Louis, which brings together the One Africa, One Nation Farmers Market, the AMWO Liberation Center, Thrive Workshop, and activities to organize African women around food, land, and economic development, and concrete skills for self-determination. You can donate at any time during this program by going to anwouhuru.org/donate, Zelle info at anwouhuru.org, Cash App at $ anwouhuru, or using the QR code on the screen. You can also support our work by purchasing ANWO merchandise at anwouhuru.org/storefront or at Decolonize Hair and Body Products at decolonize.com. Before moving forward, like, subscribe, and follow us on our platforms. It helps us with the algorithm to reach a broader audience. Tell us in the chat where you're watching from. Share this program and comment shared in the chat. If you're watching us on Burning Spirit TV, it has just launched its paid membership program, offering 20% off a promo code for the Burning Spear store, where you can find books by Chairman O'Malley as well as other Burning Spear merchandise. Basic membership is $4.99 per month. We encourage you to support this important platform by clicking the join button and signing up. And we are streaming today on Burning Spear TV and African National Women's Organization YouTube channels and annual Facebook page. Right. As we get started with the program, we'd like to invite you to join the African People's Socialist Party in St. Louis, Missouri, April 17th through 19th for the 2026 International Plenary theme, This Time Till It's Won, Power in Our Own Hands. It's not just Trump, it's the whole damn system. And this is a planning forum we use to deepen our organization, enhance our organizing, and lead the African working class beyond spontaneous protests to capture of actual dual and contending power. This is a place for freedom loving people determined to have a new world free of oppression and exploitation. To take part in this changing of the world, register today at apsplenary.org. So, and now we're starting we're starting with a new segment we're calling This Month in ANWO. This segment will highlight what ANWO has been doing on the ground, our organizing work, political education, and institution building. We'll share concrete ways we can get involved, join, or support this work. I'm going to turn it over to ANWO's Northern Region Coordinator, Miriam Muhammad. Uhuru, Miriam.
Thrilled to announce that we've raised over $1,000 for Project St. Louis. And this was made possible by the No Surrender Resist Dance Party. And that was a powerful event hosted by our volunteer, Casey Mackey, and we showcased an incredible lineup of female DJs. The funds will directly support the Liberation Center and the Thrive activities, which include community clothing swaps, skill-based trainings, and the One Africa, One Nation farmers market in St. Louis. And the second thing that we have going on, of course, is we have a few regional events here in the Northern region where I am. We have been meeting to build some momentum for the events that we call African Women Must Lead. And we're hitting the ground hard. We're having an event in Philly where I am on the 28th. And then we're also having events in DC as well as in Brooklyn, New York. And one of the most important things that ANWO has on its calendar for this year is the Black Mothers March, which I'm very excited for. And I'm trying to, of course, get my mother to go. And she also joined ANWO recently. So that would be our first Black Mothers March together as mother and daughter. And if you don't know what the Black Mothers March is, it's on May 10th on Mother's Day. And it's a grassroots coalition mobilization dedicated to demanding justice and self-determination for Black mothers. And it highlights the struggle against state-sponsored removal of our children from communities and fights that are for resources that are necessary to keep families whole and thriving. And we're marching to honor the labor of Black women and to demand a future where our children are safe, empowered, and sound. Uhuru.
Uhuru, thank you, Miriam. What we've just heard is not separate from today's conversation. It's the direct response to the conditions African women are facing right now. ANWO's work on the ground is shaped by what's happening nationally, internationally, and right here in our communities. And that's exactly where we're headed next. Badges, Borders, and Blackness. This episode looks at the scourge of colonial state violence from stop and frisk to deportation flights. We will expose how colonialism targets African and other colonized communities, regardless of birthplace or immigration status. In the next part of this program, we're going to widen the lens and dig into forces shaping African women's lives, from policy and economic shifts to imperialist violence, to the ways African women are organizing, resisting, and creating alternatives. This discussion connects political analysis to the practice. It helps us understand not just what is happening, but why it's happening and what it demands of us as organizers. So let's jump into this conversation, and I want to welcome all my comrades to the screen. Uhuru. Yesterday, I think you're first on the topic
Yes, I
list.
got it. Who are comrades? We're back. Okay. Two of us came back from a trip the other day. We from different parts of the world, so we're tired but we're ready to get into it with the breakdown. And we appreciate Comrade Coco for reading this new intro, and this and for Comrade Miriam for joining us and sharing a little bit about what's going on with African National Women's Organization. So yeah, we wanted to do an episode to talk about what's happening in Minneapolis, but more importantly, what has been happening to African people outside of the raids and the protests that have been happening recently. As of mid-February 2026, Minneapolis is still experiencing a significant contentious federal immigration enforcement crackdown under Operation Metro Surge, which has left over 4,000 people arrested in widespread protests and resulted in killings of Renee Good and Alex Preddy by agents. And despite the tension, some crime categories like homicide and shootings have decreased. I always find this interesting that so-called crime, decreases when rebellions tick up, because most times so-called crimes are to get resources and to shift resources from one place to the other, and really prevents, like, particularly the working class and the African working class, from fighting the power, right? Like, these are things that you just use to get your day to day. But when you are now confronting the state and state apparatus, those areas that would have suffering and trying to meet the needs to survive, you don't even worry about those things, because you're now confronting the primary thing, which causes you to have to do struggle to survive. So I always find that statistic very interesting when rebellions uptick. And so when we talk about what's happening now, we wanted to relate what's happening with the constant threat under which African people have been living for a long time, right? Like, since we were attacked and brought to this place, and even immigrant communities who are African, other colonized groups too, and why it's so specific to living in the American project, the colonial project, right? But people are now talking and using the word fascism a lot, to describe what is happening, and dictatorship and things like that, and or fascism or authoritarianism. But it's called fascism now, but back then it was called stop and frisk, right? Like, if we were looking at NYPD stops in 2024, 25,386 stop and frisks just in the city of New York. And 50%, this was a 50% increase from 2023. And the highest groups that were targeted were Black and Latino, and which were 90% of the people who were stopped. Frisk rates were Black people were stopped more often, 60% over white people. And we could also talk about other statistics, right? Like in 2012, the Malcolm X grassroots movement published a landmark report titled Operation Ghetto Storm. And that report, which I remember it coming out, it was like a whirlwind, because it stated that every 28 hours, a Black person is killed by a law enforcement officer, the PO, security guard, or vigilante. And then this also, when we talk about like immigration right now, we see there's a threat also to children being separated from their families, but separation from families happens every single day in our communities, right? Like, it's just a continuation and amplification of it when it comes to the immigration, but the threat of family separation has always been something that has happened in our communities, and it happens within the internal economy for African people. And we've also worked with African families and other places in around the world, and so we've been involved with organizing and advocating for families in places like Sweden and the UK, where actual family separation has been used to actually, support like the foster system, where white nationals in those places don't have to go to Ethiopia or somewhere else to go get children. All they got to do is target the immigrant communities there, and and say these are the reasons why we're taking your children. It's not safe for your child when they don't improve the conditions, they don't create the conditions in which these people can live. And so we could talk about how the system of colonialism everywhere has contributed to the ongoing attack that is happening to African people, which is contributing to the which is the root cause of the attack that is happening right now to immigrant communities around this country. And I also want to just put forward another statistic, because we forget, or maybe you did not know, around the immigration question, that when we're talking about Obama, your favorite president, right, and Trump, and we talk about deportation statistics, there's a lot more drama happening around it now. But here's a side-by-side analysis, right? Obama had 3.1 million removals in a year, right? Like that's his average yearly 3.1 million removals, as opposed to Trump's 1.2 removals in his first term, right? And I'm not saying that's a low number, they're both big, but Trump is far behind Obama. And then at its peak, Obama in one year, on average, was 432,000 removals. And Trump in his first term, 348,000. Obama, 344,000 on average, and then Trump 233,000 on average. So I just wanted to put these numbers before us, because I want us to have the context under which we are talking, not just to poop on Obama, but just to say that the system that we're living in is not some unique thing that only has amplified because of Trump, but because it has always been happening. And some of the things that people have been saying is that we need to get Trump out for what? I mean, yes, for what, but also to return to what is what I mean. To return to the status quo under like an Obama figure, where deportations happened and nobody was in the streets really protesting except for the people who were being deported. So these are some of the things we wanted to correlate to, what was happening right now in the world. And so, it's really important for us to really contextualize that and break down, like, how African people continue to face the oppression, the that is happening, and how this relates to what is happening right now with like the ICE raids and policing and over policing in our communities and surveillance. Uhuru.
Uhuru. I mean, one of the things I really appreciate about the leadership of Chairman O'Malley and the upcoming plenary is that the message is it's not just Trump, it's the whole system. Like we have we have to recognize that it doesn't matter who the president is that uh this society, this government, the state is founded on and a continual strategy of the exploitation of Black and not and basically non-white and non-rich communities. Because you can look at the exploitation of the Asian community, there's just the history of the Asian community, African community, the Native community, who we have built this country off the genocide of Native people and the stealing of their land. So we can't just fight the president. We can't just fight the presidential administration. We have to fight the entire colonial system that is oppressing us all. Oh, I'll pass it to one of my other comrades up here. We all up here shaking our heads like, yeah.
I think
Yeah.
I was gonna say, I think what happens sometimes, unfortunately, is people, and we live in a time where I guess, and then I mean, I can speak to this as someone who's like, I guess, like the Gen Z person on this. you have people from previous generations, and they watched when there were no Black mayors or no Black staff or just no Black faces in general. And then what happened was, we got people that looked like you and I to fulfill some of these offices, to fulfill some of these programs. And then, people started forgetting that that doesn't directly lead to liberation. That, like, that's still a Black face, and like they say, Black faces in high places won't save us. But I think people like don't understand that. I'm mixing my words. I think people are forgetting that like a Black face in a colonial system still doesn't undermine a colonial system. In fact, it makes it a bit even more vicious, because people are more likely to fall for it, because they're, understanding that or they're assuming that this makes it more progressive, or this means that like we can have some kind of liberation or some kind of win within the system without having to like slice it the entire thing.
Yeah. All of this, just want to second everything everyone is saying. And also, I mean, first of all, I don't really appreciate being called old. I mean, damn, like I need a reminder that I'm aging, but it's okay. No, it's all right. Becoming an elder is a blessing. I'll accept it. It's a gift that not everyone gets access to. So, I'll take it as a compliment. But you're right. I'm not Gen Z. I'm a geriatric millennial. But it's true. I accept that. It's fine. But I just one thing that's interesting that I've been thinking a lot about is as yesterday mentioned, just coming back from this trip, I was just actually like in Palestine, and one of the things that they talked about was they get so much inspiration from a lot of the African liberation movements, specifically the South African apartheid movement. They draw a lot of inspiration from. One of the things that they talked about what was so powerful about that movement was about how in the entire labor force, there was like the backbone of that was African labor, and it was so exploited. And they were able to withhold their labor in order to get real power. And Israel saw that and got scared and was like, well, we better. So they imported a foreign labor force in order to take away any and all Palestinian labor power. There's literally no Palestinian labor power. Like they can't leave the occupied territories. There are no jobs in the occupied territories. It has been weaponized against them. And this is something that they also learned, they learned from South Africa's mistakes, the apartheid government's mistakes, but they also learned from US successes and how well we were able to how well the U.S. government was able to dissemble a lot of the Black Power movements, which were, rooted in unions. Think about the Revolutionary Auto Workers, and what was happening in Detroit and Chicago and these big areas where there was a big amount of Black labor power. And, so they bring in these, foreign workers in order to strip away all labor power. But then they also, use deportation to prevent the foreign labor that is brought in, to prevent them from organizing and fighting for their own rights. And we see this with like Tyson, for example, the chicken company. They do these periodic raids. Like most of their labor is, Latino workers, and they do these periodic raids and they target people who are organizing other laborers. So, I bring all that in to say that all of this has a material basis. Everything that we're seeing, it's not just, obviously, race is a big factor. But it's for a financial purpose, it is for a financial means. And fundamentally, when we're thinking about like what we need to be doing and like what we need to be, what forces we need to be tackling, it's like economic forces, like who are the economic beneficiaries, of what's going on right now. There are plenty. There are the car companies that rent out all the cars to, the ICE workers, and they're the weapons manufacturers, which have like, so much power and influence in this country. There's the private prison corporations, like all of these things are what like brings in the power. And so I think that it's easy to get like distracted and overwhelmed by all the horrors we're seeing, and we should be outraged by them. And also understanding that it's not just, oh, they're racist, which they are. These things aren't mutually exclusive. It's also about like the economic forces that are exploiting Black labor, migrant labor, all the different labor forces, and then also pinning them against each other so they can't combine and builds power. So just wanted to bring that in because the economic factor is often overlooked when it's the thing that should be focused on fundamentally, because that is what causes what's happening. But just my good
Yeah.
words about material forces all day, but I'll pass it to someone else.
Yeah, I think that's really important because especially since, we're trying to build our Project St. Louis, what we've been learning in the party is that we have to build dual and contending power as we are working to destroy colonialism as a pedestal for the world right now, right? Like, so what else are we building in its place to replace what is being crumbled? And, economics and politics are one thing. And so really connecting that to how do we take money away from these entities and institutions, and where else do we put it? What else do we create outside of that? Because if you need a rental car, right, like where you gonna go? Like, and so
Right.
if you need a car, how do you network and create something alternative so that you don't have to go to the oppressor or these exploitative organizations and institutions? So I think that's really important. And I also have a question, like, we have, do y'all think there's an upcoming midterm election that's happening in November, and a lot of Democratic Party candidates are going to be running and pursuing and telling us that we need to vote for them in order. And I actually think that it's going to be telling us you got to get Trump out. You got to get rid of the Republicans, and that will be the driving force. But how important is it at this moment um, for the electoral politics that we've been used to? And do you think that it's effective at this point? Like, do you think people have any confidence at all in the social system and the electoral process to change anything? And for those of you, so it's a multi question. So like, and if you think that they have confidence, do you think that their confidence is really rooted in changing or transforming the situation, or just making it less
Yeah.
painful for a lot of people?
It's the latter.
Okay.
And I think that as as a people, African people and other colonized people, that we have to look beyond the two party. One of the things I'm really proud of the organizing that has been going on in the city of Cleveland, is that we do have a third party socialist candidate. Now, is that candidate getting the money and the resources in order to be able to make his campaign successful? In my opinion, no. But it is refreshing to have a third candidate that is reflective of socialist political thoughts. Um, we have to, I believe that we have to, it's just like doing protests. We can't just organize and just try and make it happen. We got to try and just change the system while we can. Now, do I think that we should just go in there and vote Democrat? No, because for the simple fact is that the Democrats tip are their current, infrastructure as it is right now, it's not conducive to overturning the oppression we face as, working class people. So I believe that we have to be more knowledgeable and still fight. Go in, hit the ballot, and then still fight. Because if we don't, how this system is, and that's if you want to vote, okay? I and I will be the first to say, like, if I don't see anybody reflect because it's a decision. If I don't see anybody that can reflect what I personally believe in, am I gonna vote? Typically not, because I don't want to be in alignment with anybody that's want to continue this parasitic system. So, but we do have to, like, in a mass way, have to still kind of control our own oppression. We still have to, because the council people that has been running for in Cleveland, I don't have any faith in they just want to do the Democratic Party's bidding. And it's not about the people, it's about, power for them. And that's the reason why it needs to be people power, all power to the people. We have to, if we're going to vote, we have to hold these, elected officials responsible for, overturning the contradictions that we face, the things that are in their control, housing, food, those economic and societal issues. We have to make sure we hold them responsible. Huru.
Yeah, I think that on the one hand, agree with a lot of what folks are saying. It, there are ways that the electoral political system can maybe mitigate some of the things that are happening. Whether that's a good thing or bad thing, is sometimes I'm not an accelerationist by any means, and also sometimes I do think that by giving people these crumbs, that we're fundamentally appeasing people and maybe pushing them away from revolutionary struggle. And on the other hand, politics is one side of struggle, and I am not one to cede any side of struggle, no matter what it is, no matter how effective I think it is. And so, on my priority list, electoral politics is not high up. And also, again, I'm not about ceding any type of struggle. If I think that there are ways in which we can participate in electoral politics that work towards some of our larger revolutionary goals, keeping in mind that this one thing is not going to lead to the revolution. Like, electoral politics will not liberate us, and we can't pretend like that it's going to. And also, we have to understand that, like, in order for people to fight, they have to be able to live, they have to be able to eat. They have to have some feeling of maybe like something to fight for, that change is possible. And I think that electoral politics sometimes reminds people, even if it's maybe a false reminder, that change is possible. And like I said, it's not like the highest on my priority list, but I think it's something that I use it as an in oftentimes, because I do work, like, for my day job, work with electoral politics, and it's an in. If I want to talk about housing justice, oftentimes I'll talk about, well, there's this ballot measure. Let's talk about this, this bond that goes to national parks, or I don't even know what. And then talking about, like, well, why do we need this in the first case? Because we're in an economic system that hoards housing instead of understanding about it as a human right. And so it can lead to these larger conversations that can lead to, like, more revolutionary thinking. But this has to be something that we're intentional about. Like, we can't just assume that telling people to vote for somebody is going to open a revolutionary mindset, but there are ways that we can imbue revolutionary thinking into our electoral politics, like, with intention. And so I support electoral politics in that capacity as something that, we can guide people towards. And also, I don't think it's the most effective thing. I think that most people, you ask them, they're just, like, not that into politics. But if you ask them about their rent, they'll be like, well, I could talk about that all day,
Exactly.
And so even, like, it's not, I don't think it's the most effective way to get through to people. I think, it depends on who you're talking to, because, you might be talking to a hardcore liberal and everything is like, our parents fought for us to vote. And it's like, they didn't fight for us to vote for segregationists and folks doing all this kind of stuff right now that, there's this whole dialogue about Gavin Newsome. And I mean, he's terrible. He's absolutely awful. And people are already, he's not even in the running for anything. People are already demanding fealty to this man who, he had a very prideful video of him stealing the few possessions of a homeless person. He was proudly participating personally in a sweep and stealing these people's possessions, few possessions they had. He's, talked in transphobic ways about how, keeping whatever gender in sports and all this other stuff. And it's like, why would we, first of all, he's not even up for election. Second of all, why would we even preemptively pledge fealty to this man who clearly doesn't have, like, a progressive mindset, much less a revolutionary mindset? And so there are ways in which I think that these conversations about electoral politics are a distraction, and that they're trying to make us pick a side without making those sides like pick a platform that we agree with, and fundamentally they have to appeal to us. Like, they are supposed to win our votes. They are supposed to be representing us. And this idea that Democrats are owed Black people's votes is something that I think more and more people are rejecting every day, as they should, because it makes no sense. And part of why we are where we are, vaguely gesturing, is that we've been doing this lesser of two evils things for so long that if genocide is not a red line, then nothing is. And now we see that playing out on our streets every day, and people are surprised, and they're even trying to blame those of us like myself that did vote third party for this past election, trying to blame us for what we see. It's not blaming the Democrats for not seeing the writing on the wall and rejecting genocide, which the average person rejected genocide, but they refused, and so they gave up the election to a clown rather than actually do what the people wanted. But I can ramble about that for too long.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is, I mean, then that's let's go further then, because we talked about electoral politics. I know that that's always on the front mouth of particularly these bourgeois media. What are we going to do? Is going to be a whole rush. I can see it right now. It always happens, right? This whole rush toward electoral politics. And the premise of this show is to talk about like the police actions right now in the streets, the immigration, how that's been impacting. We've seen the killing, public execution of 2 white people, like straight up murked. Like, one woman shot in the face, the guy who was shot 5 times once, and then 4 more while he was laying bleeding, dying on the ground. And so I think, from what I've been seeing, like, he's like, well, we've been dealing with this for a long time. Like, yeah, it's shocking to see, white people being executed in the streets. But and I'm also not a reductionist. I don't think that this is less shocking because it's white people, or that I don't care that these white people lost their lives. But it also is a comparative to see like the constant sort of surveillance, oppression that we've called colonialism for so long, like that we've been calling out for so long. And people have mobilized, over time, right? They've mobilized in the streets for this person who was shot or killed by the police. But when those mobilizations and rebellions die down, there's still the surveillance that happens to African communities. I want to know what y'all feel about that, particularly now that a lot of the things that we've been organizing for and constantly organizing for on a day-to-day basis, without ICE, without this public sort of surveillance and observation of the police, and this targeting of this, this one policing institution, and then how African people in particular are faced with this surveillance anyway. I mean, I mentioned Obama versus Trump, but I remember growing up, being in high school in Miami when they were throwing Haitians back into the sea,
Right.
telling them to go back into your banana boat back to Haiti, and they were welcoming in, the dissidents of the Cuban government, right? Like these people who were running away from Cuba. And that was a very big thing in South Florida, you know what I mean? And nationally too, when they were putting it up in the streets. And so like this constant barrage of immigration in African communities. A homegirl of mine, some guy she was dating, he left Haiti when he was like 1. And when he was 21, they deported him back to Haiti. He didn't know the language, you know what I mean? So this is the kinds of things that, we're talking about deportation in one aspect. And then we talk about policing in another, and policing and deportation in African communities have always been, worked hand in hand, and particularly in like metropolitan cities like New York City, Florida, Texas, all of these places where, I think the primary scope of, or the target person would be a Latino person. You could see that all day long, but in the mix are also African people. So I wanted to see what your thoughts are on the shaping of, the the pushback against ICE, and the mobilizations that y'all are seeing around the country. That was a broad,
Yeah,
wide
I'm letting
question, but
Miriam
you
answer.
go ahead,
Miriam,
comrade.
you're on mute, comrade.
She not on mute, but we can't hear her.
Oh, okay. I mean, I think it's very interesting. I'm gonna go ahead and say my piece while.
Yes.
Yes, go ahead, comrade.
All right, so
Okay,
while
well, one of the first
Miriam,
things,
here she go.
Go ahead, Miriam. You just had a delay. You just have a delay. Go ahead, comrade. We'll just wait.
okay, well, one of the first things I was thinking about, not to hop back to elections, but one of the first things I thought about when we were talking about elections was the fact that, with socialist candidates, quote unquote socialist candidates, because people are talking about Zoran or Jill Stein or Bush Ware, but with, supposedly a socialist candidate, how much money from Democrats and Republicans is poured into literally making you think that these people will not win whatsoever. And another thing that I was thinking about as Yejide was talking about, them, deporting Haitian people, attacking different people from different backgrounds is I remember a few years ago, I read a book, and this is way before I joined the African People's Socialist Party. It was called Red Star Over the Third World by Vijay Prashad. One of the main points that I got from it was like basically fascism is colonialism turned inward. So, colonialism, when it's done to us, it's just straight up colonialism, but like it goes under the rug until it's done to like, yeah, an Italian person or someone who's like Anglo-Saxon. And then people finally start to realize, oh, like, oh my gosh, that's like fascism. But the point is, like, fascism was colonialism turned inward, and the bottom line is like, now that I'm in the African People's Socialist Party, the bottom line was colonialism period, like, needs to be crushed. So that was like my primary point, that like when everyone was talking, that like that's what came to my mind.
And I don't want to be also an like a like a everything is like we say colonialism must go, right? Imperialism must go. And then how do we make it go, right? Like that's the ultimate question. We talked about a few things. Like, go ahead, Coco, you were gonna say.
I would just playing off what you just said. It goes back to Kwame Ture saying organization, not just mobilization, because we have to be able to continue to fight outside of the spontaneous mobilizations. We have to continue to build, and the Uhuru movement underneath the African People's Socialist Party has established like Project Black Ang, the Black Power Blueprint under the Uhuru movement and other programs. We have to build those dual and contending powers, which means that we have to put in work. We need, just like Garvey with the UNIA, we have to have African nurses organizing. African electricians and engineers have to organize to build that. We have to build the society that we want to live in. And so we can't just wait for the next protest, the next mobilization. We have to work in between. Using the work that we do with Animal. Yesterday, me and my comrades was out all day in the rain yesterday doing the clothing swaps, and so, and people are appreciative of that. We've seen the appreciation of people who are able to get clothes for their families, to get shoes for their families, and we was just having to fill up a bag for $5, and I looked at the things my mom, she donated. It's like prom is coming up. My mom had like a prom dress. I'm like, Mom, why do you have a prom dress? Why do you have a prom dress? But she had like these dresses that, these clothes that, we're able to give back to the community in that way. If you can't do the work, support the people who do the work. And at the same time, as the Midwest region representative, We need people to do the work. So we need people to do the work. We need people to come and volunteer their time. We need people to go ahead and contribute because AMWO is not a nonprofit. So we are not, eligible for these grants and these aids that are out there. So we need the power of the people. We have to build grassroots power. We have to build the power of our people, and we have to hold the people who are in these local, state, county, even federal positions to do the power of the people. They have these are if you can't elect somebody out of fear. You got to elect people out of what your interests are and what's at stake for you. And in the meantime, you need to get to work. The 2 hours of TV you have on Thursday, what if you go and put that in an organization? So go ahead. All right, so y'all ready? So before we continue, because I want to go ahead, we're having a great discussion here. Before we continue, we're going to take a brief moment to share our pre-recorded message from Decolonize Hair and Body, my favorite, and which is ANWO's economic development project, which supports the revolutionary organizing through self-determined economic development. So we're talking about power of the people and putting in the finance. This is our economic development project. So we'll be back after this commercial break.
Our skin does a lot for us. It deserves care that actually gives back. Colonize Hair and Body is African-made care, rooted in tradition and made for right now. From whipped shea butters to our Rebel oil serums, we use ingredients our communities have trusted for generations to hydrate, strengthen, and keep you glowing. Decolonizing your care, that's choosing yourself. Decolonize, indigenously rooted, care for your body, fuel for the movement.
I just want to shout out my nieces. Blup, blup, blup. My cutie patooties. Okay, there we go. Who are stars in this commercial? Yes.
Awesome. Yeah, I love the holidays. I just got my order and my whole distributor order is gone. Like the whole distributor order is gone between my family and just people that just was, all I have to say is I'm putting in the decolonize order and people go like, okay, this is what I want. This is what I want. You know. We want to go ahead and transition to our next segment, which looks at beyond U.S. borders. But too often, the resistance and
One
leadership.
second. I wanted to big up the Black Lantern Books
Oh,
Cooperative
yeah.
in
I
LA.
totally missed that. We want to salute Black Lantern Books Cooperative in LA for becoming a distributor and carrying the colonies in their store. So a hooroo to, yeah, I've seen a couple books that I like from them. So as we know, economic determination is not separate from political struggle. It is one of the ways that African women build real power and protect our communities under colonial conditions. So let's go ahead and return to discussion. Jay, you have some research.
No, not yet.
Oh,
We're gonna go back to the discussion. We're gonna get to the J
okay.
part
Can we
about
talk
African
about
women.
can we talk about like recent impacts of
Yeah, go ahead, Carmen.
let's go ahead and talk about that. Like I don't want to miss my opportunity to discuss the fuckery of Nicki Minaj gold trump card. She sold her soul in front of all of us and continue to, she unfortunately she sold her soul and now she has to stand on that. So she's still continuing and it's even more of a spiraling.
Tell me what you mean by she sold her soul.
She sold her soul by
Go
going
ahead,
in the Nicki Minaj voice. my handsome president, my favorite person, all for this gold card that she touted on social media as like, look what I got, because she is a immigrant from Trinidad Tobago, and for the Trump administration to tell her, no, that's just a souvenir. It's not a gold card for you to have this, to have citizenship. You're not a citizen. Just because you went up there and tap danced and like sold out yourself and your fans, now you're losing masses of fans because they're not with that. They're not with champion this and I would say the most polarizing difference, even if it's not the same numbers, is the polarization of um, the attack against immigrants and people who are, I wouldn't even say immigrants, just people who are from different countries here, especially when his grandparents are immigrants because they came here, and was able to build wealth because of their complexion of protection, which is being, white colonial capitalist. But you also got Nicki Minaj. That fuckery was crazy. Yeah, anybody else want to comment on that? On that before we talk about more structural.
Yeah, I was thinking about how, Malcolm X says that quote where he's like, show me where in the white community, like a trumpet player or singer as like a leader of the community. And, I always loved that quote. And I think a lot about how, Black musicians are elevated, to the status of leader in our community because of, I guess, their wealth or whatever. But these folks are fundamentally supporting empire, and whether that's Meg the Stallion on stage, shaking her ass at the Kamala concert, which nothing wrong with shaking her ass, and I love Meg. I'm Meg 10 toes down, so this is not a drag on Meg the Stallion. And also, I don't look up to any musician. I don't look up to any rapper. I appreciate them as performers, and also I'm not looking at them for my liberation, because I know fundamentally, they are pawns of the system that they benefit from. And that's why you see, remember when all the Black Lives Matter stuff was happening, suddenly Beyonce's dressed up as a Black Panther on the halftime show, and all this ICE stuff is happening, and now you see Bad Bunny, dressing up in Puerto Rican sugarcane outfits, talking about whatever. And these things are not a coincidence. This is not a coincidence. These are pressure valves, that like, yeah. And so all that's to say, I think the whole thing with Nicki Minaj, and I think with right wing turns in general, you see this with white, Black, whatever, musicians and performers, is when we see that when they are, I guess, caught. So just thinking about Nicki Minaj's relationships and her husband and her brother, and how they're both sexual predators that have a long, legal history, and that's not a coincidence. It's not a coincidence that she's sucking up to the sexual predator administration, which they all are, really. But this one is outwardly just not even pretending to not be, I guess. And so that's not, that's not a coincidence that she is so pro-Trump, and she's trying to, I think, secure, what do they call, pardons, I think, for her family members. And I also think that she's trying to make sure her ass doesn't get deported. And so some people are willing to shuck and jive because they think that they can save themselves at the expense of the people, but that never works. That never works. You can never save yourself at the expense of the people. Our only savior is with the people. It's with the people or nothing. And so these folks turn their backs on their people, hoping it'll save them, but it like I said, it never does. And I also wanted to say, I was thinking about an earlier conversation we were having about folks who are really radicalized by seeing these white folks getting killed by ICE, and I think that it's really frustrating sometimes to see that. It's like, okay, we've been getting murdered in the streets. People are like, I can't believe people are starting to just get killed in the streets, and it's like, Black people have been experiencing this for I don't even know how long. And it's especially frustrating to see like Latino folks as well. I saw a Instagram that was like, can't we just go back to the way things were a couple years ago? And it's like, wait, when it was just Black people getting murdered in those streets?
Right.
And so when I see that, it's really frustrating, and also I have to remember not to let my personal frustrations get in the way of recognizing the revolutionary potential in these moments. And I think that we have an obligation to say, like, okay, like, welcome, like,
Right.
welcome. You're here a little late, but you're here. You're here. And so thankful that you made it here a little late again, but then connecting those folks back to previous movements, to previous movements around, Black people getting murdered in the streets and et cetera, et cetera. And so that's a responsibility that we have as, folks who are trying to build a movement, is to welcome in the newcomers, even though they're late, keep our little snide comments to ourselves, and then connect them to previous movements so they understand what exactly they missed. Just wanted to add that point.
Mhm.
I was gonna say, with Nicki Minaj, I feel like, well, first of all, on behalf of like the Caribbean community, this is like I get secondhand embarrassment from looking at Nicki. Like, it's so embarrassing. Oh my god! And when I was a little girl, I was a very big Nicki Minaj fan. I used to like watch all the videos, even though my mom and dad wouldn't need to. I'd sneak and go listen to her music and stuff. So to see her like very, very embarrassing. But the other thing that kind of gets me is I think she is a very important indicator of like where politics have gone, because I think about, and this is before I was born, but I think about Sister Soldier and Sister Soldier. Soldier didn't kill 4 girls bombing, and Sister Soldier, murder Emmett Till. And I think about like Nicki Minaj, and it's just interesting with female rappers how, because I've always been a big fan of women in rap, but it's just very indicative of where politics have gone and like the consciousness has gone, like when it comes to music and the entertainment industry. Because at one point, at least you could kind of get like some semblance of conscious, but where we are now is just very, very atrocious is the best word.
I'll say this, like the level of resistance and rebellion in society is a thing that creates culture, right? And so like when we've seen James Brown say I'm Black and I'm proud, is because there was African people in the street who were fighting for their lives. The Black Panthers, it was Black is beautiful. There was a whole culture. There was a whole political revolutionary culture. And even with the rebellions of the brothers who got killed a couple years ago when the rebellions popped off and shut down city streets and stuff like that, we had artists come out with music, and even what's his name? I heard not Kanye, the other one. He's not even similar to Kanye, but New York married to Beyonce. I can't remember his name.
Jay-Z.
Yes, yeah. I know people who are Jay-Z fans are like, oh my God, she doesn't remember no Jay. Child, I don't care. but yeah, the politics shapes culture, and and yes, I do. Comrade Jay in our chat is saying they was out in the street crumping, uh, crumping for change. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so what we're seeing right now with Nicki Minaj and maybe even some other sellouts is that the revolutionary fervor or strength of our community is not strong enough and unified enough. And I think when we talk, I'm in the movement, but I work in nonprofit spaces, and I think one of the contradictions when we talk about the unified idea around what freedom and liberation is very fractured. And so you don't see this unified identity around how to push back. Some people believe that you can do it through electoral politics. Some people think you can do it through a nonprofit space. Some people think you can do it, just by, asking and, getting a seat at the table and things like that. And that's not usually how, so it's very fractured. It's disorganized, and it's not like really a place of strength. And so you really see that. And how, and I'm mentioning those things because those are usually where the money is in the so-called movement space. Like, money isn't in AMWO. AMWO has to generate our money, right? Like, we have to get our money. We get it from y'all, right? But there's a money spaces in movement that is funded by foundations, the state, and things like that, that influence what people generally get to see on TV, the mass mobilizations, the posters, the signs, and the messaging too. And so when you get to that space, that also influences who gets in touch with these celebrities and shape how they frame things and how they message. And so I think that's really important too, in terms of how we see celebrities and what they say and how they communicate, the line, which may sometimes be in line with what people generally are feeling, but it doesn't hold the line, because it can shift if the moment is past, right? Like, it's just something that people are concerned about, and they might need talking points, and they'll go to this movement organization that has funding that to get those movement talking points. And I've seen it happen. So I think it's really important that we have programs like this that can communicate, like, the African working class, what we think generally speaking, and also what we think that we like. Most part, I agree with what Jay was saying in terms of, like, being able to say that, electoral politics is one piece of the pie, and the movement, the African People's Socialist Party, have also used electoral politics to convey political education to the people. And we also are doing dual and contending power. We are also, doing political education and mobilizations and things like that. So we run the gamut, which is sometimes why we're so tired. But
Right.
we in it. We're talking about in it, so like
Right.
so these are the things that are really critical. And I too agree that we can't really, rely on, public figures who aren't born in the struggle, who aren't created and cultivated through the need and desire to transform society, but only get into it when society tells them that they need to be talking about it, which is a different thing. So I think we should transition into Jay, and then we can
Yeah.
go ahead. Coco.
All right. Oh, you ready for me? Okay. All right. So I want to go into our next segment, which is what colonized women have been up to around the world. So our next segment looks at beyond U.S. borders. Too often, the resistance and leadership of colonized women globally is ignored or minimized. In this segment, we'll highlight how colonized women around the world have been organizing, resisting, and building alternatives under conditions of imperialism and occupation. This segment is informed by the research compiled by Jay and Miche and connects local struggle to global resistance. Jay, did you want me to continue, or you want to go ahead and
No, I'll jump in. So first, I want to talk about what's going on in Kenya. So femicide has been officially declared a national crisis as of this past January in 2026, following a decade where at least 1,069 women were murdered, often by intimate partners or family members. And data released just this month in February reveal a really disturbing pattern that nearly 65% of victims are young women aged 18 to 35. And approximately 70% of these killings occur in private residences. So, there's this idea of home as the safe space, or keeping women home to keep them safe. But, we're seeing that 70% of these killings are happening in the homes. And so the home is not often a safe space. It's often the site of violence. And so there's a presidential task force that's being led by former Deputy Chief Justice Nancy Barasa, who's recommended establishing a standalone femicide law and a survivor compensation fund. But the justice system is a pretty significant hurdle already, with cases taking an average of 4 to 6 years to conclude and less than 10% reaching a final judgment. But activists are continue to push for full implementation of these reforms to dismantle systemic misogyny and to address the institutional failures that allowed this violence to persist. And of course, we know this is not just a problem in Kenya. This is a problem. Femicide is a problem around the world. It's a problem in the U.S. And something that particularly affects Black women in the U.S. as well. So, just sending strength and love to our comrades in Kenya who are doing this work on gender-based violence. And another thing that I wanted to talk about is, so folks may or may not have heard that Trump had threatened to impose an oil blockade on Cuba. And on January 29th, he did announce these really punishing tariffs on any countries that provide oil to the island. People might have also seen that Trump stole an oil tanker that was a Venezuelan oil tanker that was destined towards Cuba. He took that to further add to U.S. oil profits. So yet another oil war, hooray. But Cuba's energy infrastructure really relies on these foreign imports for energy generation, even though recently China has offered to build up their solar infrastructure. They're still like a long way from being, solar, having that energy independence from solar. So they're experiencing a really deteriorating situation right now. And, Mexico, people have been talking about how President Sheinbaum, how amazing she is, yet, she caved to President Trump's demands to not provide oil, saying that they're going to provide diplomatic and, I think they said also they might provide some food supplies, but they're not going to provide the oil that Cuba so desperately needs. And so Cuban officials have announced that they're implementing a nationwide far-reaching energy saving plan that prioritizes fuel and electricity for essential and life-saving services. So this sharply reduces transport services, cuts down operating hours for schools, universities, and workplaces. And, let's be clear about this. This is collective punishment. So, they have blackouts, long gas lines, delayed medical care, and just families struggling to get through the day. Cuba has already been really suffering from fuel shortages since the U.S. blockade has been happening for decades. And in recent weeks, power outages in Havana have really increased. This is all part of that, decades-long sanction, financial strangulation, diplomatic isolation. And now we're seeing targeting of fuel shipments to pressure Cuba, to deepen their economic crisis. And ultimately, they're trying to force regime change on the island. And so it's gotten so bad recently that Cuba has actually run out of jet fuel. And, a lot of flights, not all of the flights, have been canceled and people are unable to travel. It's that bad. So, yeah, that's our international news. So yeah,
I'll say yeah, because I went to Cuba last year and it was already, when I saw that Trump attacked Venezuela and was talking about the oil, which was one of the highest, the way that Cuba got a lot of its oil, and I was, I I am I have I'm I'm trying to say this. I don't know why I try to measure my words, but these leaders of these countries ain't shit. That was not measured, right? But like what the US is showing is that it has this power and control to shape the world and what it is doing.
Terrorism.
And it is terrorism, but what it also shows is the weaknesses that of these other countries and their ability to stand on their own without US contributions and influence. And I think if I was a world leader at this point, I'd be like, look, I gotta get out of this stuff. I gotta make sure like, we got to start being independent of this thing. We have to have our own autonomy so that we can do what we want. Because how can any country that has any how could they let this happen, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like it's really ridiculous. And so the Caribbean, all the places that Cuba has helped in its 60-year period are now unable to help Cuba in its time of need because they have not been able to resist colonialism, or they've kowtowed to colonialism, and so they are trapped just like Cuba is trapped right now. And so I think it's really important for people who have been on the side of Cuba for all these years, that if do what Jay says, we have to get people where it hurts. We have to be able to bring down the economic peace so that we can force them to release the stranglehold on Cuba. But I think it's really more important for world leaders and for leaders in general to really be able to see what is happening here, not as a defeat, but also as a way that power needs to be shifted, right? And the way that power needs to be shifted is that colonialism must be destroyed, because when colonialism is destroyed, we would not allow for an entire island.
Especially an island that has given so much to the world.
Entire
Um,
population of one of the biggest islands in the Caribbean, the greatest populations, is you see how large it is compared to other like
yes.
millions of people who will suffer because of this. And then the U.S. government will say because it's Cuba. No, it's because of you. It's because of the U.S. government and the fact that these world national countries are unable to establish any backbone for themselves, any independence, any autonomy separate from, because they never wanted to. That's why we know that's why how we understand that colonialism is a death trap, and capitalism is a death trap, and it has to be destroyed, because this does not encourage life. This encourages death. And if you can't see it in this particular instance, then I don't know, you
And
know.
it's doing the same thing that they did to Haiti.
Yeah.
And Haiti, they destabilized the Haitian economy. And they did it strategically as payback for Haiti's revolution, centuries ago at this point. Haiti is still paying for their freedom. And the US went in and strategically destabilized the country of Haiti. And then, now they're sending Haitian, people back. One of the notes I had was about these women who were deported from Puerto Rico back to Haiti, and then ended up being, decapitated and murdered, because the Haitian people needing resources at any cost at this point, because every single um, colonial backed president or leader of Haiti has been overturned by the people, to the point that now it's a fight for power, because it's just like the gangs, gangs here, gangs in New York, these are people just wanting power. They wanting agency, they wanting autonomy to build their country, and they can't. So they actually do it it's just like in our neighborhoods, and unfortunately we do it at the expense of each other. So when these women they see that these women went into America, even though it was Puerto Rico, and we know the issues. That's one thing that I liked about the Super Bowl, is that it exposed the structural what I want to say the structural inequities of Puerto Rico as a colony of, because they are an actual colony of the United States. They're not a state, they're a colony, and they want to say territory, but it's a colony of the United States. And they went there, and I've talked to a lot of people from different countries. In fact, I just was on a panel with international students, and what is being sold to outside of America is that everybody has the opportunity to be a millionaire in America. Everybody is doing well, but it's not until they come here, as immigrants, legal or illegally, however you want to say it, that they understand that America they was sold a dream, a pipe dream. As you know, if you was I'm an 80s baby. Miriam, I'm an 80s baby. And we say pipe dreams, they sell us the crack pipe, as a way to treat, so we say pipe dream, and they sold these people in the international community the pipe dream of you come to America, you're gonna get money. You come to America, you're gonna be fine. But when you come to America, there's Americans in this country living in third world conditions. I'm here in St. Louis now, and you drive around parts of St. Louis, it looks like a third world country. The houses are boarded up and dilapidated. The people are just surviving the best way they can. And so you're seeing, I mean, that goes on what's here. But to the international community, it's like we all rich, we all got these nice homes. So when these women were deported back to Haiti, they were under the impression that these people family had money, these people had resources, and they didn't. So when they ransom was not satisfied, because their ransom are illogical numbers, like $500,000. If somebody kidnapped me right now, my family can't come up with $500,000, $1 million. These people, it's illogical numbers, but they all also think that we have. So we have to, take that into account, because that's what's presently happening to people that are being deported. I have a family member that was deported back to Laos, and he's never been there. He's been in America since he was like 3 years old, and he's have to find a way to sustain himself. So we are beginning to wrap up, and we want to remind you, you can still donate to support Project St. Louis. You can become a member of AMWO if you're African woman and femme, and you can support our work through the Colonized Hair and Body and also AMWO merchandise. This work is only possible because African women and our allies choose to stand up. We choose to do the work. We're all volunteers. We're not getting paid for our part. We do it out of the love. So thank you for watching the breakdown, and thank you for organizing with us. We want to go into our Q&A session. So please prepare your questions. When submitting your question, we ask that you include your name, your location, and your question. And drop your question directly into the chat, and regardless of which platform you're watching on, we can go ahead and see those questions.
1 second. Jay's leaving us before we get into
Oh,
the
yes.
Q&A. Jay, can you just tell us where you're going, and then we can maybe direct people there too?
Well, I mean, one of the things that I'm working on, mute, I think you're echoing a little bit. So I work with Cuban solidarity organizations. We're doing like an in-person gathering around that, but just wanted to recommend to people, the Vencer Ramos Brigade or the National Network on Cuba is doing really good work around Cuban solidarity work. People stay tapped in. There's ways to go to Cuba if you want to bring aid and that kind of thing. So just wanted to highlight that before I jump off and leave you all for Q&A, and appreciate the great discussion. And you folks
Thanks,
next
Jay.
time.
Uhuru,
Thanks, Jay.
Jay.
Uhuru.
All right. And we do have a question here from Mailer Tarshall. Who benefits more from being a colony of the United States, Puerto Rico or the U.S.? It's overwhelming the U.S. If you look at the history of U.S. U.S. and Puerto Rico, Johnson and Johnson, the sugar domino, sugar company, also Planned Parenthood was pretty much, they did their experimentation of birth control involuntarily on Puerto Rican women, and has a history of sterilization as well. And then now we talk about the resources that come out of Puerto Rico. Like, it's a reason why it's a colony. The U.S. is not into goodwill. The U.S. is not into goodwill. The U.S. is in for power and resources. And that's the reason why it is a colonial capitalist society, a structure, is because it went into Puerto Rico because they had sugar. It went into Puerto Rico, even Puerto Rico experiences power outages, and that's one of the things that was highlighted in the which was highlighted in Bad Bunny's um, Super Bowl performance, and that's because the power and that resource, the electric, is powering our major grid. That's why their power structures are the actual power for Puerto Rican people is unstable because their resources are coming into our main power grid. And that's what makes their personal, like they're on the island, unstable. So like I do appreciate that question because it does allow us to have this, like for us to discuss this and bring it back to, the US being a colonial capitalist system, because that is where it's the resources that Puerto Rico have, the people resource, the power resource, the natural resources, and then the forced plantation of sugar, which actually destroys their ability to have their own agricultural structure to feed their people. Oh, yeah, somebody said Planned Parenthood is a satanic child sacrificial cult. Yeah, it's
I highlighted this the police arrest and do extrajudicial killings. I had to look that acronym up, Conrad, like EJK. Extrajudicial killings, but they make it out like EJK is an aberration, though they do it in the Black community. ICBP also arrests, but they're doing extrajudicial killings, so they're the same as the police in the Black community. Absolutely,
yeah, we can look
absolutely.
at Keith Porter Jr. His, that's the other side of, ICE are not police. They are part of the policing system, but they're not police. And so, and they're giving right now they're giving democratic immunity. I think that's what it's called. So when you had a off-duty ICE agent kill Keith Porter Jr., he's not being held responsible because of that. He's not being held responsible because of that democratic immunity, and that he killed that man in cold blood in front of the community and his family.
I just want to appreciate the donation that Comrade Unemployed Scholar gave, $10 USD. Appreciate you. We do have a goal of raising $100 before we end this program. And I also want to appreciate Zoe Franklin for donating $20 on our Cash App. And also unemployed, actually total unemployed scholar donated $13 during this program. So we're like a quarter of the way there. So we appreciate those. And people can also donate using that QR code in the top left hand side of the screen. And if we're offline, you can just go to our website, nwohur.org/donate to contribute and donate to African National Women's Organization. Go ahead, Conrad. Just any other additional.
Yeah. So I don't see any additional. I'm sorry, I'm going scrolling through the chats. I didn't see any additionals here. I just want to thank everybody for attending as we're wrapping up. And again, this work is only possible because African women and our allies, we choose to stand up. We choose to volunteer our time and our resources. Shout out to all our comrades here in St. Louis. I have a new appreciation for St. Louis being out here and actually, getting to work. So, we are one of the things that was brought to my attention is that Annual is not a social club. We're not a social club. We are African women and our allies and supporters and volunteers doing work. Um, doing the work here. And as I hope everyone joins Anwo. I believe all three of us are going to be here for that, going to be in St. Louis for the plenary. Go ahead and register at apsplenary.org and join us, that Friday through Sunday. I'm getting little bits and pieces about the program that I'm really looking forward to it. And it's going to be powerful, a very powerful program in, teaching us how to organize and emphasizing the importance of organization during this time. We're seeing the colonial structure fall. All out of the things that are happening now is because the system is falling. The imperial is dying, and so and if we do not create dual and contending powers, we're going to fall with this structure. And I refuse to fall. So I give my heart, my blood, sweat, tears to this movement for our freedom. We deserve dual and contending power. We deserve agency, and we deserve autonomy to build the world that we want to live in. So thank you, Comrade MQ, for your donation. Continue to, donate, like, share, and like, share, and comment on if you're doing the replay. Share this with your friends. I got Uhuru Mecca throwing in 10 more. So do we have a count? That'll bring us to what, 53? Okay. I may not be good at a lot of things, but I'm good at math. So Uhuru, thank you for watching the breakdown. I can't wait to our next episode. And thank you for organizing with us. And thank you for supporting the African National Women's Organization, ANWO, and African Women's Liberation. Uhuru, we are winning.